In a quiet mansion, an elderly woman is abused by her daughter-in-law, who hides her cruelty behind a mask of kindness. The maid, the only witness to the abuse, begins secretly recording everything. But the facade collapses when the son returns unexpectedly and sees the truth with his own eyes. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The silence in the mansion was almost suffocating that Tuesday morning. Every room breathed luxury and elegance, from the Persian rugs covering the marble floors to the paintings carefully arranged on the walls. Everything seemed perfect, organized with millimeter precision, as if the house were a showroom and not a home. On the second floor, 78-year-old Eleanor sat in her blue velvet armchair, looking out the bedroom window. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held a teacup that had long since gone cold. The morning light illuminated her face, marked by the years, revealing eyes that had once been lively, but now carried a deep sadness and a fear she couldn't completely hide. The sound of high heels echoed down the hallway, growing closer. Eleanor stiffened in her chair, her hands tightening around the cup. She knew exactly who was coming and what it meant for her day. Veronica, 42, opened the door without knocking. Her appearance was impeccable, perfectly styled blonde hair, masterfully applied makeup, and a dress that cost more than many people earned in a month. Her smile, however, didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, dearest mother-in-law," she said with a sweetness that sounded far too fake. "How did you sleep?" Eleanor swallowed hard before answering. "Fine, Veronica. Thank you for asking." "Glad to hear it," Veronica said, approaching and observing every detail of the room with a critical eye. "I see you haven't taken your morning medication yet." "Eleanor, we've talked about this. The doctor was very clear about the importance of being on time." The old woman pointed to the nightstand where a small bottle of pills sat. "I was waiting for breakfast so I wouldn't take them on an empty stomach." "Ah, of course," Veronica laughed, but the sound was sharp. "Breakfast. About that, I have some news. Starting today, we're going to make some adjustments to your diet. The doctor recommended a more restrictive diet for your age. You understand, don't you? We want what's best for your health." Eleanor nodded slowly, even though she knew she hadn't seen any doctor in weeks. Her son, Edward, was on another one of his business trips, this time to Germany, and wouldn't be back for another 2 weeks. "Rosa prepared a special smoothie for you," Veronica continued, picking up a glass with a greenish liquid from a tray she had left on the dresser. "It's very nutritious. It will replace your breakfast today." The smoothie had a strange, almost medicinal smell. Eleanor accepted it with trembling hands, knowing she had no choice. Over the last few months, her meals had gradually diminished. First, it was the sweets she loved so much. Then, the sweet roll she ate every morning. Now, even her basic meals were being adjusted for health reasons she didn't understand. "Drink it all," Veronica ordered, watching her intently. "It's for your own good." Eleanor drank the bitter liquid in small sips, her stomach churning with each attempt. When she finished, Veronica smiled, satisfied. "Perfect. Now, about your bath today." Eleanor's heart raced. The baths had become her greatest source of anxiety. Veronica always insisted the water had to be very hot to help with circulation, but the temperature was almost unbearable. Her legs still showed red marks from the previous week's bath. "Could we possibly wait until later today?" Eleanor asked timidly. "I feel a little weak." "Nonsense," Veronica interrupted, her voice losing its fake sweetness for a moment. "Hygiene is essential, especially at your age. We can't get lax about these things, Eleanor. What would Edward think if he knew I wasn't taking good care of you?" The mention of her son made Eleanor shrink even more. Edward worked so hard, sacrificed so much for the family business. The last thing she wanted was to be a burden to him. Maybe Veronica was right. Maybe she was overreacting, being too sensitive. "You're right," she murmured. "I'm sorry for complaining." "Don't worry, dear." The fake smile returned to Veronica's face. "I know you get confused. Sometimes it's normal at your age. That's why I'm here to take care of you." Just then, a soft knock on the door interrupted them. Rosa, the 58-year-old housekeeper who had worked in the house for 15 years, entered discreetly. Her eyes met Eleanor's for just a second, but it was long enough for the old woman to notice something different in the employee's gaze, a concern that wasn't there before. "Mrs. Veronica," Rosa said respectfully, "do you need anything? I heard voices and thought—" "We were just discussing today's routine," Veronica replied curtly. "You can leave, Rosa. I'll call you when I need you." But Rosa remained standing for a few seconds longer than usual, her eyes discreetly observing the room. The cold teacup in Eleanor's hand, the empty smoothie glass, the tense posture of her elderly employer. It was all registered in her experienced mind, the mind of someone who knew that house like the back of her hand. "Of course, ma'am. I'll be in the laundry room if you need me," she finally said, closing the door softly. Veronica waited until she was sure Rosa was gone before continuing. "Where were we? Ah, yes, your bath. I'll get everything ready for you. And Eleanor—" She approached the armchair, placing a hand on the old woman's shoulder with unnecessary force. "Remember what we talked about regarding complaining. Edward has enough problems to deal with. We don't need to add unnecessary worries to his life, do we?" Eleanor nodded quickly, feeling the pressure of Veronica's fingers through the thin fabric of her blouse. "Excellent. Now I'll go prepare your bath. The water will be the perfect temperature, as always." Veronica left the room with determined steps, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and fears. The old woman looked out the window again, observing the perfectly manicured gardens of the estate. Everything looked so beautiful on the outside, so normal. How could anyone imagine what was happening within those elegant walls? Downstairs, Rosa walked through the garden, gathering the clothes she had hung out to dry. But her actions were mechanical. Her mind was completely focused on what she had witnessed in the bedroom. Over the past few months, she had noticed subtle changes in the house's dynamics. Mrs. Eleanor was thinner, more withdrawn. Veronica had taken total control of her mother-in-law's care, dismissing the nurse who used to come 3 times a week. And Edward was traveling more than ever. Rosa folded a white sheet carefully, but her hands trembled slightly. She had worked for Edward's first wife, Carmen, who had passed away 3 years ago. Carmen had treated Eleanor like a second mother, with genuine affection and respect. The difference in treatment was glaring. On the second floor, the sound of running water began to echo from the bathroom. Veronica was testing the temperature, but Eleanor knew it wouldn't be a comfortable one. It never was. The old woman closed her eyes, trying to gather strength for another day. Edward would be back in 2 weeks. She just had to hold on for 2 more weeks. But a part of her was beginning to wonder if 2 weeks might be too long. From the garden, Rosa looked up at the second-floor window and saw Eleanor's silhouette in the armchair. For a moment she considered going up, inventing some excuse to enter the room. But Veronica was up there, and the housekeeper knew her presence wouldn't be welcome. Still, something inside her said she had to act. The question was how. The sound of the water stopping echoed through the house, followed by Veronica's sweet, false voice calling, "Eleanor, your bath is ready, dear." Eleanor rose from the armchair with difficulty, her weak legs protesting the movement. She knew she couldn't put it off any longer. She also knew the next few minutes would be an ordeal, just as all her baths had become in recent weeks. What she didn't know was that this time someone would be paying much closer attention than before. The bathroom was shrouded in a thick mist when Eleanor entered, leaning against the wall to keep her balance. The hot steam fogged the mirrors and created a suffocating atmosphere that immediately made her lungs protest. Veronica stood beside the tub, testing the water with her fingertips, a satisfied smile on her face. "Perfect," she murmured, drying her hand on a towel. "Exactly as the doctor recommended. Circulation needs to be properly stimulated at your age." Eleanor looked at the water and felt a shiver run down her spine. The steam rising from the surface was too dense, and she could feel the heat radiating even from a distance. Her legs still ached from the minor burns of the previous week, and the prospect of going through it again made her stomach clench. "Veronica, couldn't we cool the water down a little?" she asked in a trembling voice. "My skin is sensitive and—" "Eleanor," Veronica interrupted with an exaggerated sigh of patience, "we've been over this. You need to trust me. I'm the one who takes care of you, who sacrifices every day to ensure your well-being. Edward entrusted me with this responsibility, and I can't let him down." The old woman lowered her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settle on her shoulders. Edward worked so hard, was always under so much pressure. Veronica was right. She had offered to take care of her, and maybe Eleanor was just being ungrateful. "Now take off those clothes," Veronica ordered, her voice completely losing its artificial sweetness. "We don't have all day." With trembling hands, Eleanor began to undress. Every movement was slow and painful, not just from physical weakness, but from the growing humiliation she felt. Veronica watched her with cold, impatient eyes, as if supervising a tedious chore. Meanwhile, downstairs, Rosa was finishing up with the breakfast dishes Veronica had taken up to Eleanor. She immediately noticed that the tray had come back with only the empty smoothie glass. The plate of toast remained untouched, as did the small portion of fruit she had specially prepared. Rosa frowned. For the past 2 months, Eleanor's meals had become increasingly scarce. Veronica always had an explanation: a doctor's diet, digestive issues, the need for dietary control. But the housekeeper had enough experience to know when something wasn't right. She remembered clearly how Carmen, Edward's first wife, used to care for her mother-in-law. Hearty meals, affectionate conversations, walks in the garden. Eleanor used to laugh, tell stories, and participate in household decisions. Now she barely left her room. The sound of a muffled cry from the second floor made Rosa drop the dish she was drying. The sound was quick, almost imperceptible, but she had known every echo in that house for 15 years. It was a cry of pain. In the bathroom, Eleanor was partially submerged in the scalding water, her hands gripping the sides of the tub tightly. Silent tears streamed down her face as she tried to adjust to the temperature that felt like it was burning her sensitive skin. "Come on, don't be so dramatic," Veronica said coldly, forcing her to sit down completely in the water. "It's just a bath. Women your age need this special care." The water was so hot that Eleanor felt as if thousands of needles were piercing her skin. Her legs, already sensitive from previous baths, burned intensely. She wanted to scream, to get out of there, but Veronica's firm, authoritative voice kept her paralyzed. "Please," she whispered, "it's too hot." "It's the right temperature," Veronica replied, grabbing a sponge and starting to scrub the old woman's back with rough movements. "Stop complaining. Do you want me to tell Edward you're not cooperating with your own treatment?" The threat had an immediate effect. Eleanor shut her mouth and tried to endure the pain in silence, biting her lower lip to keep from making another sound. Her hands trembled violently as she clung to the sides of the tub, her knuckles white from the force. Downstairs, Rosa couldn't focus on her tasks. The maternal instinct she had developed over the years working in that house was screaming that something was wrong. She knew all the sounds of the mansion, Edward's footsteps, his business calls, even the late-night whispers that used to come from the master bedroom. But that muffled cry was different. It was one of suffering. Determined, she went up the stairs silently, her decades of experience allowing her to move without making a sound. She stopped in the second-floor hallway, pretending to straighten the paintings on the wall, while listening to the sounds coming from the bathroom. "Water on your face, too," she heard Veronica's voice, followed by a splash and another muffled groan from Eleanor. "No, please, it'll get in my eyes." The old woman's weak voice reached Rosa. "Stop being difficult, it's just water." Rosa felt her blood run cold. This wasn't a normal bath. This was torture. Discreetly, she pulled her old cell phone from her apron pocket. She wasn't very tech-savvy, but Edward had insisted she have a phone for emergencies. With trembling hands, she managed to activate the recording function. The audio wouldn't be very clear through the walls, but maybe it would pick up something. Inside the bathroom, Veronica had decided to wash Eleanor's hair, pouring hot water directly over her head. The old woman squeezed her eyes shut, trying to protect herself, but the scalding water ran down her face and neck, causing even more discomfort. "Your skin is very red," Veronica commented with false concern. "It must be your circulation improving. This is very good for you." Eleanor's legs were, in fact, an intense shade of red, clear signs of minor burns, but she didn't dare complain again. The last time she had tried to protest the bath temperature, Veronica had left her without dinner, claiming that stubborn women didn't deserve rewards. "Now let's finish up quickly," Veronica announced, grabbing a bar of soap and starting to scrub the old woman's body with unnecessary force. "Edward called yesterday and said he might be back sooner than expected. We need you to be impeccable when he arrives." Eleanor's heart leaped with both hope and fear. Edward coming home early meant her suffering might lessen, but it also meant she would have to pretend she was fine. Veronica always reminded her that worrying Edward with silly things would be an unnecessary cruelty. Rosa, still in the hallway, managed to capture a few scattered phrases through the door. The words, "Stop being difficult," and "Your skin is red," were recorded clearly enough. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When she finally heard Veronica announce the end of the bath, Rosa hurried back down to the kitchen, stashing the phone in the back of the drawer where she kept her dish towels. She needed to think, to plan. Half an hour later, Veronica came downstairs with Eleanor's dirty clothes in her hand. "Rosa," she called in her usual sweet voice, "wash these clothes separately. Eleanor is having some incontinence issues. It's normal for her age, but we need to be discreet." Rosa took the clothes, immediately noticing they were just wet, not soiled, as Veronica suggested. Another lie to justify whatever was happening upstairs. "Of course, ma'am. Is Mrs. Eleanor all right?" "Perfectly fine." Veronica smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Just tired. She's going to rest for the remainder of the morning. She is not to be disturbed by anything, understand?" "I understand." Veronica went back upstairs, and Rosa was left alone with her disturbing thoughts. She looked at the clothes in her hands, and then at the drawer where her phone was hidden. A decision was taking shape in her mind. On the second floor, Eleanor lay in bed, wrapped in a thick robe that made her burned skin sting even more. Every movement was torture, every touch of the fabric a reminder of the traumatic bath she had just endured. Veronica entered the room again, carrying a tray with a glass of water and 2 pills. "Your medication," she announced, placing the tray on the nightstand. "The doctor said you need to take these as well to help with your anxiety. You've been very agitated lately." Eleanor looked at the pills she didn't recognize. Her usual medications were just for blood pressure and a vitamin. These were different, larger, with a color she had never seen before. "What are these pills?" she asked timidly. "For your own peace of mind," Veronica answered evasively. "Now take them. I don't want to have to tell Edward that you're not following the doctor's orders." Once again, the threat of disappointing her son worked. Eleanor took the pills and swallowed them with difficulty, a bitter taste lingering in her mouth even after drinking all the water. "Perfect," Veronica smiled, satisfied. "Now rest. I don't want to hear you moving around the room. Silence is essential for your recovery." She left the room, locking the door from the outside with a key she always kept with her. The sound of the lock turning echoed in the silence, and Eleanor understood with growing horror that she was being imprisoned in her own room. Downstairs, Rosa clearly heard the sound of the key in the lock. Her worst fears were being confirmed. Mrs. Eleanor wasn't just being mistreated. She was being held prisoner in her own home. That afternoon, while Veronica was out for her usual social activities, lunch with friends, a manicure, shopping, Rosa decided to act. She went up to Eleanor's room and knocked softly on the door. "Mrs. Eleanor, it's Rosa. Are you all right?" "Rosa," the old woman's weak voice came from inside the room. "I can't open the door." "I know, ma'am. Veronica locked it from the outside, but I'm going to find a way to help you." There was silence for a few seconds before Eleanor spoke again, her voice filled with despair. "She said Edward asked her to lock me in here when I'm too agitated. She said it's for my own good." Rosa clenched her fists, feeling an anger she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Mrs. Eleanor, that's not normal. That's not right." "But Edward," the old woman began, always returning to her concern for her son. "Edward doesn't know any of this," Rosa said firmly, "and when he finds out, I'm sure he'll want to do something about it." Just then, the sound of the garage door opening echoed through the house. Veronica was back earlier than expected. Rosa ran downstairs, reaching the kitchen seconds before Veronica entered through the door connecting the garage to the house. Her heart was pounding, but she forced a neutral expression. "I'm glad you're back, Ma'am," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to know if I should prepare anything special for Mrs. Eleanor's dinner." Veronica studied the housekeeper's face for a few seconds, her piercing eyes searching for any sign of suspicion. "You don't need to worry about that," she finally said. "Eleanor is on a very strict diet. I'll be handling her meals personally." "Of course, Ma'am." But as Veronica went upstairs, Rosa knew she had crossed a line. She could no longer pretend she didn't see what was happening. That night, after the house fell silent, she sat in the kitchen with her cell phone in her hand, looking at the number Edward had left for emergencies. Her fingers trembled over the keypad. Would he believe her? Would Veronica convince him she was lying? And most importantly, would she have enough courage to make the call that could change everything? From the second floor, a very faint sound reached her, almost imperceptible. It was Eleanor, crying softly in her locked room. The early morning was silent when Rosa finally worked up the courage. It was 3 a.m., and Veronica was fast asleep in the master bedroom, as she always was after taking her sleeping pill. The housekeeper had observed this routine for weeks, waiting for the right moment to act. With the phone in her trembling hands, she dialed Edward's number in Germany. The time difference meant he would likely be awake, perhaps in a business meeting. Each ring of the phone made her heart beat faster. "Hello?" Edward's familiar, tired voice came from the other end of the line. "Mr. Edward," Rosa whispered, trying to keep her voice down. "It's Rosa. I'm sorry to call so late, but it's about Mrs. Eleanor." There was a pause before Edward answered, and when he did, his voice carried immediate concern. "Rosa, did something happen? Is my mother okay?" The words caught in Rosa's throat. How could she explain what she was seeing without sounding like a resentful employee trying to stir up trouble? How could she make him believe a situation so absurd and terrible? "Mr. Edward, I need to talk to you about some things that are happening here. Mrs. Eleanor is not well. She's not being treated as she should be." "What do you mean?" "Veronica told me my mother is perfectly fine. I spoke with her just yesterday." "When was the last time you spoke directly with Mrs. Eleanor?" Rosa asked softly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Edward was trying to remember, and the realization that he hadn't spoken to his mother in over 2 weeks began to dawn on him. "Veronica said she was resting whenever I called, that she had a headache or was in the bath. Rosa, tell me exactly what's going on." Rosa took a deep breath and began to recount everything she had observed: the reduced food, the scalding baths, the strange medications, and most importantly, the fact that Eleanor was being locked in her own room. "That's impossible," Edward interrupted, his voice filled with disbelief. "Veronica would never do that. She's always been so attentive to my mother." "Mr. Edward, I recorded some things," Rosa said quickly before she lost her nerve. "Sounds of what happens during the baths. And I can show you the pills she's giving Mrs. Eleanor. They're not the same ones the doctor prescribed." The line went silent for a long moment. Edward was processing information that completely contradicted the image he had of his wife and the situation at home. "Rosa, I need time to process this. Are you sure about what you're telling me?" "I am, sir. And there's something you need to know. Urgently. Last night I overheard Veronica on the phone talking about taking Mrs. Eleanor somewhere. Something about papers and special treatment. She didn't know I was listening." Edward's blood ran cold. "What kind of papers?" "I couldn't hear clearly, but she mentioned power of attorney and something about a facility. Mr. Edward, I think she's planning to take Mrs. Eleanor out of the house." The call was abruptly cut short by a noise from upstairs. Heavy footsteps were walking down the hall, very different from Veronica's soft tread. Rosa quickly hung up and hid the phone, pretending to check the refrigerator. "Rosa?" Veronica's sleepy voice echoed through the house. "Is everything all right down there?" "Yes, Ma'am," Rosa replied, forcing a natural tone. "I just got a glass of water. I'm sorry if I woke you." "What time is it?" "A 3:15, Ma'am." There was silence for a few minutes before the footsteps returned to the master bedroom. Rosa stood motionless in the kitchen, her heart beating so loudly she was sure Veronica could hear it from the second floor. In the master bedroom, Veronica hadn't been able to fall back asleep. Something in Rosa's voice had made her uneasy. For the past few months, she had noticed the housekeeper watching her more closely, asking subtle questions about Eleanor, and always seeming to appear at the most inopportune moments. She got out of bed and went to the window, looking out at the silent garden. Her plans were nearly complete. She had contacted a private care facility specializing in elderly patients with behavioral issues. The director, a greedy man who asked very few questions as long as the payment was generous, had agreed to admit Eleanor without much official paperwork. The power of attorney she had forged with the help of a corrupt lawyer was almost ready. Just a few final details, and she would have total legal control over Eleanor, and more importantly, over the considerable inheritance the old woman had accumulated over decades. Edward was so absorbed in his international business that he barely paid attention to domestic details. He was the perfect son-in-law for her purposes, present enough to lend legitimacy to the situation, but absent enough not to interfere with her plans. But Rosa was becoming a problem. The next morning, the day began with an eerie normalcy. Veronica came down for breakfast with her usual smile, wearing an elegant outfit as if heading to another of her social lunches. "Rosa," she said while sipping her coffee, "I'm going out this morning and won't be back until late this afternoon, maybe even tonight. I have several appointments." "Of course, ma'am, and Mrs. Eleanor?" "I've already taken care of her breakfast. She's having an anxiety attack today, very agitated. The doctor recommended complete rest. She's not to be disturbed by anything or anyone. You understand, don't you?" Rosa nodded, but her instincts were on high alert. Veronica never left for such long periods, especially without leaving detailed instructions about Eleanor. After Veronica left, Rosa immediately went up to the second floor. She knocked softly on Eleanor's bedroom door, but got no response. Worried, she knocked harder. "Mrs. Eleanor, it's Rosa. Are you all right?" A faint groan came from inside the room, followed by an almost inaudible voice. "Rosa. Help. Me." The housekeeper felt panic seize her. Eleanor had spoken in English, something she only did when she was very confused or under the influence of strong medication. "Mrs. Eleanor, I'm going to get the spare key," she called through the door. But there was no answer. Rosa ran to Edward's room, where she knew he kept copies of all the house keys in a desk drawer. Her hands shook as she searched frantically until she found the key ring. Back in Eleanor's room, she unlocked the door and went inside. What she saw horrified her. The old woman was collapsed on the floor next to the bed, wearing only a thin nightgown. Her skin was extremely pale, and she appeared to have thrown up during the night. The pills Veronica had given her the day before were scattered on the floor, as if Eleanor had tried to get rid of them. "Oh my God," Rosa murmured, kneeling beside her employer. "Mrs. Eleanor, can you hear me?" The old woman's eyes opened slowly, but they were glazed and unfocused. She tried to speak, but only garbled sounds came out. It was obvious she had been drugged with something very strong. Rosa helped Eleanor sit up on the bed and brought her a glass of water. Each sip was a tremendous effort for the old woman, who seemed to be fighting the effects of whatever Veronica had given her. "Going to take away—" Eleanor managed to whisper between sips of water. "Today? Papers? I signed—" Rosa's heart stopped. "You signed something?" Eleanor nodded weakly, pointing to the nightstand, where there were some documents Rosa hadn't noticed before. She picked up the papers and began to read, her limited education still allowing her to understand enough to be terrified. It was a power of attorney, giving Veronica total control over every aspect of Eleanor's life. Medical, financial, housing decisions, everything was now in Veronica's hands. And on the last page was an admission document for a private facility called Serenity Haven. "She forced me," Eleanor cried. "Said that Edward wanted this." Rosa felt a rage boiling in her chest. Veronica had forced a 78-year-old woman under the influence of drugs to sign documents that basically handed her over as a prisoner. She grabbed her cell phone and called Edward again, but this time the call went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times with the same result. He was probably in meetings or in transit. Looking at Eleanor, who was struggling to keep her eyes open, Rosa made a decision. She couldn't wait for Edward to return or to get in touch with him. Veronica had said she would be back late in the afternoon, but what if she came back early? What if she brought people from the facility to get Eleanor? She had to get her employer out of there. But where? She remembered Eleanor's sister, who lived in a nearby city. They had corresponded for years, but Veronica had cut off contact, claiming the visits made Eleanor too agitated. In the nightstand drawer, she found an old address book with phone numbers handwritten by Eleanor herself. There it was. Irene, sister. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. Hello? An elderly female voice answered. Mrs. Irene, this is Rosa, the housekeeper at Mrs. Eleanor's house. Are you her sister? Rosa. My goodness, it's been so long. How is my sister? I've been trying to call for months, but that daughter-in-law of hers always says Eleanor can't come to the phone. Mrs. Irene, Mrs. Eleanor is in danger. I need to get her out of the house today. Can you help? There was silence for a few seconds before Irene replied with urgency, Tell me everything. Quickly, Rosa explained the situation. Irene, who had always been suspicious of Veronica, didn't hesitate. Bring her to my house immediately. I have a friend who's a doctor. He can examine her, and I'm calling my lawyer. Rosa looked at Eleanor, who had managed to stay awake during the call, and nodded weakly. We're getting out of here, Rosa said, helping the old woman to her feet. I'm taking you somewhere safe. But as they reached the staircase, the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the garage echoed through the house. Veronica was back, much earlier than she had said. And through the window, Rosa could see that she wasn't alone. 2 men in suits got out, drove the car with her, carrying a folded stretcher and a briefcase. The facility had come for Eleanor. Panic seized Rosa as she heard voices approaching the front door. Eleanor, still under the effects of the medication, could barely stand, leaning heavily on the housekeeper's arm. We have to get out of here now, Rosa whispered, looking desperately around the room for a solution. The main staircase was out of the question. Veronica and the men from the facility would be coming up that way any moment. But Rosa remembered the service stairs at the back of the house, which led directly to the kitchen. It was a narrow, steep staircase that Carmen had used years ago when she wanted to sneak down to prepare culinary surprises for the family. Mrs. Eleanor, she murmured, helping the old woman walk slowly. We'll take the back stairs. Can you walk? The old woman nodded weakly, though every step was a tremendous struggle. Rosa quickly grabbed a few important documents from the nightstand, Eleanor's ID and some papers that might be useful later. From downstairs came Veronica's voice, explaining the situation to the men from the facility. She's on the 2nd floor, she was saying, in her usual sweet tone. She had a severe episode during the night. The medication has left her a bit disoriented, but that's normal for patients with her condition. We understand, a deep male voice replied. We have experience with similar cases. The transfer will be handled with the utmost discretion and care. Rosa and Eleanor reached the service stairs just as they heard footsteps ascending the main staircase. The housekeeper carefully opened the narrow door, silently thanking herself for having cleaned and oiled the hinges the week before. The descent was agonizing. Each step was a challenge for Eleanor, who leaned on the wall, and Rosa alternately. Her bare feet were cold, and she was trembling from the cold, the fear, and the effects of the medication. Easy, Mrs. Eleanor, Rosa whispered encouragingly. We're almost there. From the 2nd floor, Veronica's loud, irritated voice reached them. What do you mean she's not here? We checked the bathroom and the closet, one of the men replied. The room is empty. That's impossible, Veronica shouted, and for the first time, Rosa heard her true voice without the artificial sweetness. She was here this morning. Where could she have gone? Footsteps echoed across the 2nd floor as they searched the other rooms. Rosa knew that in a few minutes they would come down to search the ground floor. They finally reached the kitchen. Rosa helped Eleanor sit in a chair while she quickly grabbed a few essentials. The purse with the household cash Edward left for emergencies, a thick coat for the old woman, and her own cell phone. Rosa, Eleanor gripped the housekeeper's arm with surprising strength. Thank you for saving me. We're not safe yet, Mrs. Eleanor, Rosa replied, putting the coat over her employer's shoulders. "But we're going to make it." The sound of footsteps coming down the main stairs made them both flinch. Veronica was coming down, and her voice was getting closer. "Search every room. She couldn't have left the house on her own. She's too weak for that." Rosa looked at the back door that led to the garden. It was the only possible exit. She helped Eleanor to her feet again, and slowly they walked toward the door. But when Rosa touched the doorknob, she found it was locked. Veronica had changed the locks the previous week, citing security concerns, and now she had all the keys. Despair washed over the housekeeper. They were trapped. "I found something," one of the men shouted from the living room. "There's an address book here with phone numbers. Someone named Irene." Rosa closed her eyes, knowing Veronica would soon connect the dots. If she called Irene, she would find out that Eleanor's sister was waiting for them. Just then, the kitchen landline rang. The shrill sound made both women jump. Rosa looked at the phone, hesitating whether to answer. On the third ring, Veronica yelled from the living room, "Rosa, answer the phone! Where are you?" With trembling hands, Rosa picked it up. "Clark residence." "Rosa, it's Dr. Miller, Eleanor's doctor. I need to speak with her urgently. I received some test results from last week, and there's something very concerning." Rosa's heart raced. Dr. Miller was Eleanor's real doctor, the one Veronica had pushed away, claiming he was too alarmist. "Doctor," she whispered, "Mrs. Eleanor, she really needs you right now." "What do you mean? What's going on?" Before Rosa could answer, Veronica appeared in the kitchen doorway, followed by the two men from the facility. Her eyes flashed with rage when she saw Eleanor sitting there, wearing the coat. "Rosa," she said in a dangerously calm voice, "hang up that phone. Now." "It's Dr. Miller," Rosa said, still holding the receiver. "He wants to speak with Mrs. Eleanor." "Dr. Miller is no longer her doctor," Veronica declared, advancing toward the phone. "Hang up immediately." But Rosa did something that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of hanging up, she put the phone on speaker. "Dr. Miller," she said loud and clear, "can you hear me? Veronica is here with two men from a facility trying to take Mrs. Eleanor by force. She was drugged and forced to sign papers this morning." "What?" The doctor's indignant voice echoed through the kitchen. "Veronica, is this true?" Veronica's face contorted with rage. She lunged to grab the phone from Rosa's hands, but the housekeeper dodged, keeping the receiver out of her reach. "Dr. Miller," Eleanor managed to say, her voice weak but audible. "Help. She hurts me, forces me." "Eleanor? My God, what have they done to you? Your voice sounds strange." "Medication," Eleanor whispered. "Lots of medication that I don't know." One of the men from the facility, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, took a step back. "Mrs. Veronica, we were not informed that there would be resistance or that the patient was being held against her will." "She's confused," Veronica lied desperately. "Her doctor, Dr. Santos, authorized the transfer. All the papers are in order." "Dr. Santos?" Dr. Miller's voice boomed from the phone. "I've been Eleanor's only doctor for 15 years. I don't know any Dr. Santos." The second man from the facility also backed away. "Ma'am, if there's a dispute over the patient's medical condition and the validity of the documents, we cannot proceed with the transfer." Veronica realized she was losing control of the situation. Her eyes darted frantically between Rosa, Eleanor, and the men, trying to find a way to reverse what was happening. "You don't understand," she said, her voice losing all composure. "She's my legal responsibility now. I have the power of attorney. I can make all the decisions for her." "A power of attorney obtained under duress," Rosa said firmly. "She was drugged and threatened into signing." "Dr. Miller," Eleanor continued, She burns me. In the hot water. She won't let me eat. She locks me in." The line went silent for a few seconds before the doctor exploded. "Veronica, that's abuse. It's a crime. I'm calling Adult Protective Services and Edward right now." "Edward is in Germany," Veronica said quickly, trying to regain control. "And he has nothing to do with this." "He has everything to do with it," Dr. Miller retorted. "He's her son, and I have the number of the hotel where he's staying." It was then that Veronica made her biggest mistake. Losing her patience completely, she lunged violently at Rosa to grab the phone, shoving Eleanor in the process. The frail old woman fell from her chair, hitting her shoulder on the floor and crying out in pain. The two men from the facility looked at each other, and one of them spoke firmly. "That's enough. We're leaving. We will not participate in elder abuse." "You can't leave!" Veronica screamed hysterically. "I paid you. We have a deal." "The deal is off," the first man said, heading for the exit, "and we will be reporting this situation to the proper authorities." Rosa knelt beside Eleanor, checking to see if she was hurt. The old woman was crying softly, holding her shoulder. "Dr. Miller," Rosa said into the phone, "please call someone. We need help. Urgently." "I'm already dialing Edward and emergency services," the doctor replied. "Don't hang up this phone. I'm staying on the line until help arrives." Veronica, realizing her plans had completely fallen apart, looked around the kitchen like a cornered animal. Her mask of the devoted wife had shattered, revealing the cruel coldness that had always been hidden beneath. "You've ruined everything," she said in a low, threatening voice. "You have no idea what you've done." Just then Rosa's cell phone rang. It was Edward returning her call from earlier that morning. She answered with trembling hands. "Rosa, I managed to get the first flight out. I'm at the airport in New York. What the hell is going on there?" The housekeeper began to cry with relief. "Mr. Edward, please come quickly. Your mother is hurt and Veronica—" She couldn't finish the sentence because Veronica had bolted from the kitchen and was running up the stairs. From the second floor came the sound of drawers being frantically opened and objects being thrown to the floor. Veronica was grabbing something, and Rosa had a terrible idea of what it might be. "Mr. Edward," she said quickly into the phone, "your wife is desperate. I don't know what she might do." The sound of objects being thrown and drawers being violently opened echoed from the second floor. Veronica was destroying something up there, and the noise grew with every second. Rosa held Eleanor tightly, both of them trembling in the kitchen as they waited for someone to arrive and help them. "Dr. Miller," Rosa said into the landline, which was still on speaker. "She's on the second floor making a lot of noise. I'm afraid of what she might be doing." "Stay away from her," the doctor replied urgently. "I've already called emergency, social services and the police. I also managed to speak with Edward. He's in traffic coming straight from the airport. He should be there in an hour." At that moment, a loud crash of shattering glass came from upstairs, followed by a scream of frustration from Veronica. Eleanor flinched against Rosa, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "She's furious," the old woman whispered, her words still slurred from the medication. "I've never seen her like this." Rosa observed her employer's condition with growing concern. Even 2 hours after being found on the floor of her room, Eleanor still showed clear signs of having been drugged. Her coordination was impaired, her speech was slurred, and she seemed to have trouble keeping her eyes focused. "Dr. Miller," she said into the phone, "Mrs. Eleanor is still very unwell. What kind of medication could cause these effects?" "Describe the exact symptoms," the doctor requested. "Slurred speech, disorientation, hand tremors, difficulty walking, very dilated pupils." There was silence for a few seconds before Dr. Miller responded with evident anger. "That sounds like heavy sedatives, possibly anti-anxiety medication in an excessive dosage. It's dangerous for someone her age, especially without proper medical supervision. Veronica may have put Eleanor's life at risk." More violent noises came from the second floor, this time accompanied by the sound of paper being torn. Veronica was destroying documents. "She's destroying evidence," Rosa murmured, understanding the situation. "She probably has more things hidden up there." It was then that she remembered something. A few weeks ago she had seen Veronica leaving Edward's office with a box of documents, claiming she was organizing important family papers. At the time, Rosa thought it was strange but didn't dare question it. "Dr. Miller, I think she might be going through the family's financial documents. Edward keeps everything important in the office." "My God!" the doctor exclaimed. "Edward needs to know this immediately." Rosa grabbed her cell phone and tried to call Edward, but the call went straight to voicemail. He was likely still in traffic or his phone had died during the trip. Just then, Eleanor pointed to the kitchen table where an envelope lay that Rosa hadn't noticed before. "She left this morning," the old woman managed to say. "Said it was important that I keep it." Rosa opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were copies of bank documents that made her blood run cold. They were statements from the charitable foundation that had been created in memory of Carmen, Edward's first wife. The foundation, which was supposed to help seniors in need, had had nearly all its money transferred to Veronica's personal account. The amounts were astronomical, more than $2 million embezzled over 18 months. "Dr. Miller," Rosa said in a trembling voice, "I found documents here. Veronica stole money from the charity foundation of Edward's first wife. A lot of money." "That explains a lot," the doctor replied gravely. "She needed Eleanor incapacitated to continue the embezzlement. With power of attorney, she would have had full access to the family's accounts." The sound of rapid footsteps coming down the stairs made both women tense up. Veronica was coming back, and from the sound of her steps, she was running. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying a suitcase and a briefcase full of documents. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her clothes were dirty. The elegant, controlled woman from hours ago had been replaced by someone desperate and dangerous. "Hang up that phone," she ordered in a hoarse voice, "now." "Dr. Miller is helping," Rosa replied, trying to keep her voice firm. "We're not hanging up." Veronica dropped the suitcase and lunged for the phone, but Rosa moved quickly, placing herself between her and the device. "Get out of my way," Veronica screamed. "You have no idea what you've done. I had everything planned, everything." "Planned?" Dr. Miller asked through the phone. "Veronica, can you hear my voice?" She stopped and glared at the phone with hatred. "Dr. Miller," she said with venomous sarcasm, "the doctor who never understood that Eleanor needed more intensive care." "Intensive care?" the doctor retorted. "You call torture intensive care?" "She was becoming too independent," Veronica explained with chilling coldness, as if discussing the weather. "Always wanting to give her opinion on everything, always meddling in Edward's business. Someone needed to put her in her place." Rosa felt nauseous hearing the casual confession. Eleanor, sitting beside her, began to cry silently. "And the foundation's money?" Rosa asked, holding up the documents. Veronica laughed bitterly. "That money was just sitting there, being wasted on charity. I knew how to use it better. For investments, for opportunities." "For what opportunities?" Dr. Miller insisted. "To buy the private care facility, obviously," Veronica replied, as if it were obvious. "It was going to be perfect. Eleanor would be permanently admitted. I would have total power of attorney over everything, and Edward would keep traveling without suspecting a thing. In a few years, when she passed on, naturally, of course, I would inherit everything through Edward." The confession was even more shocking than Rosa had imagined. Veronica wasn't just mistreating Eleanor, she was planning her gradual elimination. "You're confessing to attempted murder," Dr. Miller said in a controlled voice. "You know that, don't you?" "You can't prove anything," Veronica retorted, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "It was going to be natural. Old people die, it happens." At that moment, the sound of cars pulling up outside the house echoed through the kitchen. Veronica looked toward the windows and turned pale. There were several cars, more than just Edward returning. "Looks like help has arrived," Rosa said with relief. Veronica went into a full-blown panic. She grabbed her suitcase and ran for the back door, but remembered it was locked. She tried the windows, but they were too high and had security bars. The sound of the front doorbell echoed through the house, followed by firm knocks on the door. "Adult Protective Services, we have a warrant for a wellness check." Veronica looked frantically around the kitchen, searching for an escape. Her eyes fixed on the pantry, and she ran toward the small door that led to the basement. "Veronica!" Dr. Miller shouted through the phone. "Don't run! It will only make things worse for you." But she had already disappeared through the pantry door, carrying her suitcase and documents. Rosa left Eleanor sitting and ran to the front door. When she opened it, she found not only the social workers, but also 2 police officers, and to her, immense joy, Edward. He was pale, with deep dark circles under his eyes, and wrinkled clothes from his trip. When he saw Rosa, he immediately asked, "Where's my mother?" "In the kitchen, Mr. Edward. She needs a doctor urgently." Edward rushed past her, heading straight for the kitchen. When he saw his mother sitting in the chair with the coat over her shoulders, trembling and looking frail, his face contorted with pain and rage. "Mom," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "I'm here, it's all right now." Eleanor looked up at her son, and for the first time in months a faint smile appeared on her face. "Edward, you're back. I'm never leaving you alone again," he promised, holding her trembling hands. "Never again." One of the social workers approached. "Mr. Clark, I'm Maria Santos from Adult Protective Services. We received a serious report of abuse. Where is your wife?" Edward looked at Rosa, who pointed to the pantry door. "She went down to the basement," she explained. "She was trying to escape with a suitcase and documents. But when the police officers opened the pantry door and went down the stairs, they found only the abandoned suitcase. On the floor and the basement door leading to the backyard wide open. Veronica had escaped." "She knows the house better than we thought," Edward murmured, looking at the open door. "That exit leads straight to the back street." One of the officers spoke into his radio, organizing a search of the neighborhood, but they all knew Veronica had a several-minute head start. Dr. Miller, still on the phone line, interrupted. "Edward, how is Eleanor?" "Doctor," Edward replied, taking the phone, "she's very weak and disoriented. What did Veronica do to her?" "I need to examine her immediately. I'm on my way over now. But from what I heard, she was drugged with heavy sedatives. It's dangerous at her age." Edward closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened to his mother while he was on the other side of the world, trusting the woman who had nearly destroyed her. The social worker approached him with a notepad. "Mr. Clark, I'm going to need a full statement about everything that happened here, and we'll need to collect evidence for the criminal case against your wife." "Criminal case?" Edward repeated, still trying to absorb the reality. "Based on what I heard of her confession over the phone and what I'm seeing here, we're talking about elder abuse, embezzlement, forgery, and possibly attempted murder," the social worker explained gravely. Edward looked again at his mother, who was being examined by one of the paramedics who had arrived with the emergency team. Veronica had escaped, but she had left behind a trail of crimes that would take years to fully investigate and repair. And the worst part was knowing that if Rosa hadn't had the courage to call him, his mother might not have survived his wife's diabolical plan. In the 2 weeks following Veronica's escape, the mansion that once exuded quiet luxury had transformed into a hub of constant activity. Forensic investigators, social workers, doctors, and lawyers took turns in the rooms, each collecting evidence of the crimes that had been committed there. Edward barely slept. He had set up a bed in the room next to his mother's so he could hear her if she needed help during the night. Dr. Miller had explained that recovery from the effects of the medication would be gradual, and that Eleanor might experience anxiety, nightmares, and mental confusion for the next few months. In the first week, she had been hospitalized for a full detox. The tests revealed an alarming amount of sedatives in her system, enough to be lethal if the dosage had been just slightly higher. The discovery made Edward realize that Veronica had been quite literally killing his mother slowly. "Mr. Edward," Rosa called softly, entering the office where he was meeting with his lawyer, Henry Davis. "Mrs. Eleanor is awake and asking for you. She wants to talk about the documents we found." Edward stood up immediately. In recent days, his mother had begun to recover, fragments of memory about things Veronica had forced her to do. Each revelation was like a new stab to his heart. In the bedroom, Eleanor was sitting in the armchair where she used to spend her mornings, but now she looked completely different. Her cheeks had regained some color, her eyes were more alert, and she could hold a teacup without shaking. "Edward," she said when she saw him enter, "I need to tell you something important." I remembered more details about the papers she made me sign. Edward sat on the bed next to the armchair. "You can tell." "Me, Mum. At your own pace." "It wasn't just the power of attorney," Eleanor began, her voice still weak but firmer than it had been in months. She made me sign changes to the will, too. She said you had asked for it, that it was to protect the inheritance from taxes." Edward's blood ran cold. What kind of changes? She became the primary beneficiary of everything. The house, the accounts, even the shares in your father's company. She said it was temporary, until you resolved some legal issues I didn't understand. Henry Davis, who had followed Edward into the room, took out his notepad. Mrs. Clark, do you remember when this happened? Was it an official document? It was about 3 months ago. She brought a man here, said he was a notary public. But now that I think about it, he didn't seem official. He was nervous, sweating a lot, and he left very quickly after we were done. Edward clenched his fists. Every day he discovered a new layer of Veronica's betrayal. It wasn't just abuse. It was an elaborate plan to seize the entire family fortune. Mom, he said gently, do you remember the man's name, or any detail that could help us find him? Eleanor closed her eyes, concentrating. He had a birthmark on his neck, very noticeable, and Veronica called him Mark. But she told me afterward that I shouldn't mention the visit to anyone, that it was confidential. Henry Davis jotted everything down quickly. I'll pass this information to the investigator. A fake notary is a federal crime. If we can find him, he might lead us to Veronica. Just then, the landline in the room rang. Edward answered, expecting another of the many calls from investigators or journalists who wouldn't stop calling. Edward, an unfamiliar female voice said on the other end, this is Patricia, Veronica's sister. Edward felt his stomach clench. Veronica's family had remained silent since the crimes had hit the news. Patricia, he said cautiously, what can I do for you? I need to meet with you urgently. I have information about where Veronica might be, but I can't talk over the phone. It's dangerous. Dangerous? Veronica. She's not the only one involved in this, Edward. There are other people, and they know I'm trying to talk to you. Edward looked at Henry, who had overheard the conversation, and nodded gravely. Where can we meet? Edward asked. The Oak Room Cafe on Lexington Avenue, today at 3 p.m. A table in the back. And Edward, come alone. If they see you've brought police or lawyers, I won't show up. The call ended abruptly, leaving Edward with more questions than answers. Henry approached him. Edward, this could be a trap. Veronica might be using her sister to lure you out. Or it could be our only chance to find out where she is, Edward replied. I'm going. Not alone. I'll arrange for discreet surveillance. The police will be nearby, but won't interfere unless there's a real danger. A few hours later, Edward was sitting at a back table in the Oak Room Cafe, watching every person who entered. At 3:15 p.m., a nervous-looking woman of about 35, wearing dark sunglasses, approached the table. Edward? She asked quietly. He nodded, and she sat down quickly, constantly looking around. Thank you for coming, she said, taking off her glasses to reveal red, swollen eyes. I'm Patricia. I need you to know that not all of our family knew what Veronica was doing. But someone did? Patricia nodded reluctantly. Our older brother, Richard, he was helping her with the financial side of the crimes. Richard launders money for some very dangerous clients. Edward felt his stomach turn. What kind of clients? People who don't take it well when someone betrays them or exposes their business. Veronica used Richard's contacts to hide the money she stole from the foundation. But now that the story is public, these men are furious. Where is she, Patricia? She went to Mexico first, but Richard told me she can't stay there. His contacts have business on the border and she's become a liability. They want her to disappear permanently. Edward understood the implication. Veronica wasn't just fleeing from American justice. She was running from people who could kill her. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I have a young daughter. And because I saw the pictures of your mother in the news. What Veronica did was monstrous. But she's my sister, and I don't want her to be murdered. Patricia took a piece of paper from her pocket. Richard told me she plans to come back to the States. There's a hidden bank account here that she hasn't been able to access yet. Enough money to start a new life. Edward took the paper. It was an address in New York and a date, 3 days from now. She's going to be at this address? Richard said so. It's a house they rented months ago as a hideout. But Edward, you need to understand. If the criminals get there before the police, Veronica will disappear forever, and they might try to silence anyone who knows about their business. Including you? Patricia nodded, fear evident in her eyes. That's why I'm leaving the country tomorrow morning with my daughter. I'm going to my aunt's house, in Canada, until this all blows over. Edward studied the woman's face, trying to gauge if she was telling the truth. There was genuine desperation in her expression, but also something else, relief, as if telling him everything was a weight lifted from her shoulders. Patricia, is there anything else I should know? About other crimes, other victims? She hesitated for a long moment before answering. This wasn't the first time Veronica has done this, Edward. What do you mean? Before she married you, she was briefly married to an older gentleman in Palm Beach. He passed away under strange circumstances after she gained access to his accounts. His family always suspected, but they could never prove anything. Edward's world seemed to spin. Veronica was a serial predator who targeted men with money and vulnerable relatives. Do you have proof of this? The previous widow, Lucy, is still alive. She lives in Palm Beach. She tried to investigate at the time, but Veronica disappeared right after the funeral, until she met you. Patricia stood up from the table, putting her sunglasses back on. Edward, be very careful. Veronica is more dangerous than you can imagine, and the people she's involved with won't hesitate to hurt anyone who threatens their business. Wait, Edward called as she started to walk away. How can I be sure this information is true? Patricia took a photo from her pocket and placed it on the table. It was an old picture of Veronica, next to a grey-haired man, both smiling in front of a church. That's Frank, her first husband. He died 3 months after the wedding, sudden heart attack, at 58, with no history of heart problems. Edward picked up the photo with trembling hands. On the back it was written, Frank and Veronica, wedding, January 2019, 2 years before she met him. When he looked up, Patricia had vanished into the street crowd, leaving Edward alone with the terrible realization that he had married a serial killer. And now she was planning to come back. Edward returned from the meeting with Patricia, his mind reeling. The photo of Veronica's previous wedding burned in his pocket like physical evidence that he had been deceived more deeply than he could have imagined. When he got home, he found Henry Davis waiting in the living room, accompanied by 2 FBI agents. Edward, Henry stood. As soon as he saw him, Agents Thompson and Garcia need to speak with you urgently. There have been developments in the case. Agent Thompson, a middle-aged man with a grave expression, got straight to the point. Mr. Clark, we've managed to trace your wife's financial movements. What we've discovered is much worse than we thought. Edward sat down heavily in an armchair, still processing everything Patricia had told him. Worse how? The embezzlement from the foundation was just the tip of the iceberg, explained Agent Garcia, a woman with a determined look. Veronica opened accounts in the names of shell companies and moved over $8 million in the last 2 years. Money that came from various sources. What other sources? Your personal accounts? Your mother's accounts and... Agent Thompson hesitated. We also found transactions that suggest she was selling confidential information from your company to competitors. Edward felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. My company? How would she have access to confidential information? Your personal computer. Documents left at home, phone conversations, Henry explained. You trusted her completely. She had access to everything. Agent Garcia opened a folder and showed him bank statements. The amounts received coincide exactly with periods when your company lost major contracts to competitors. She was literally selling your trade secrets. Edward ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. It wasn't just his mother who had been a victim. His company, built by 3 generations of his family, had also been sabotaged. How much money did she manage to steal in total? He asked in a hoarse voice. So far, we've identified approximately $12 million, Agent Thompson replied. But we believe it could be more. Some accounts are still under investigation. Just then, Rosa hurried down the stairs. Mr. Edward, Mrs. Eleanor is asking to speak with you. She said she remembered something very important about money. Edward looked at the agents, who nodded for him to go check. In the bedroom, Eleanor was sitting up in bed, holding a small golden key in her trembling hands. "Edward," she said as soon as she saw him, "I remembered where I hid some important things. Veronica never knew about the safe in the basement." "What safe, Mom?" "Your father installed a secret safe in the basement many years ago. We always kept important documents and some emergency cash there. The entrance is behind the wine rack." Edward took the key, looking at it curiously. "What's in there?" "Original copies of the will, copies of all the company contracts and—" She hesitated. "I also put some recordings in there." "Recordings?" "In the last few months, when I realized Veronica was mistreating me, I started secretly recording some of our conversations. I have a small recorder your first wife gave me years ago. I managed to record a few things before I got too weak to use it." Edward's heart raced. "What kind of conversations?" "Her talking. On the phone with someone about transferring money, about the plans to have me committed, and—" Eleanor lowered her voice. "A conversation where she told someone what she had done to her previous husband." Edward felt his blood run cold. She confessed about Frank. She said it was easy, that she just had to mix a few things into his heart medication. She said with me it would be different because I was more resilient, so she needed more gradual methods. The confirmation that Veronica had murdered her previous husband and was planning to do the same to his mother made Edward lean against the wall to keep from falling. "Mum, are these recordings in the safe?" "They are. And I also put some photos I found in her room in there. Photos of other older men, with notes about their assets and families." Edward understood immediately. Veronica hadn't just had 2 husbands. She was a serial predator who had already targeted other families. "I'm going to get those recordings right now," he said, kissing his mother's forehead. "This could be crucial to arresting her." In the basement, Edward quickly found the wine rack and behind it, a small safe built into the wall. When he opened it with the key, he found exactly what his mother had described: important documents, cash, and a small digital recorder. But there was something else. A folder labeled life insurance contained documents that made Edward feel sick. Veronica had secretly taken out high-value life insurance policies on him and his mother, naming herself as the beneficiary in case of accidents or natural deaths. The dates on the policies coincided exactly with the start of the abuse against his mother. When he returned upstairs with the recorder and the documents, he found the agents waiting, anxiously. "What did you find?" Agent Garcia asked. Edward placed the recorder on the table and pressed play. Veronica's voice, clear and emotionless, echoed through the room. "It wasn't hard with Frank. Just a few drops in his medicine every day until his heart couldn't take it anymore. With the old woman it's been more complicated because she's stubborn, but I have time." The recording continued for several minutes, revealing shocking details about her plans. Veronica spoke casually about drugging Eleanor, about the life insurance policies, and about how she planned to speed up the process if Edward started to suspect anything. "My God," Agent Thompson murmured. "She was planning to kill you both." "And there's more," Edward said, showing them the insurance documents. "She took out million-dollar policies on us without our knowledge." Agent Garcia examined the documents quickly. "Edward, this changes everything. We now have direct evidence of premeditated attempted murder. When we arrest her, she won't be able to escape these charges." "When we arrest her?" Edward repeated. "Are you sure she's going to show up at the address Patricia gave me?" "We've had the place under surveillance since yesterday," Agent Thompson explained, "and we've also flagged the bank account she needs to access. The moment she tries to move that money, we'll know." Henry Davis approached with a worried expression. "Edward, there's something you need to know. We managed to contact the widow of Veronica's first husband, Lucy, in Palm Beach. And? She's not the only one. Lucy gave me the contacts of 2 other women whose husbands died under suspicious circumstances after getting involved with Veronica. We're talking about at least 5 confirmed victims in 10 years. Edward sank into a chair, trying to process that he had married a serial killer who had murdered 5 people. "How did she always get away with it?" he asked. "Constant identity changes, forged documents, and most importantly—" Agent Garcia hesitated. "She chose her victims very carefully. Older, lonely men with distant or complicated families, people whose sudden deaths wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. But with me it was different, Edward realized. She made mistakes. Yes. First, you have very public business ties. Second, your mother was alive and lucid enough to notice the abuse. And third, Agent Thompson smiled grimly, she underestimated Rosa's loyalty and courage. As if on cue, Rosa appeared in the room carrying a tray of coffee. "Sorry to interrupt," she said timidly, "but I thought you'd want to know. I just received a strange phone call." "What kind of call?" Edward asked. "A man asking if I still work here and if Mrs. Eleanor is okay." When I asked who it was, he hung up, but I recognized the voice. It was the man who pretended to be the notary, the one Mrs. Eleanor called Mark. The agents immediately exchanged glances. "Rosa," Agent Garcia said urgently, "are you sure it was the same voice?" "Absolutely. He has a distinct southern drawl and talks very fast when he's nervous. It was him." Agent Thompson stood up quickly. "Edward, this means they're communicating. Veronica might be trying to get information on the situation here before she comes back. Or," Henry Davis added with concern, "she could be planning one last attempt to silence the witnesses before she flees for good." A chill ran down Edward's spine. "You think she might try to come back here? To harm my mother or Rosa?" "It's possible," Agent Garcia admitted. "Veronica knows her chances of escape drop dramatically if Eleanor and Rosa can testify against her." At that exact moment, the house phone rang again. Everyone fell silent, staring at the device. Edward answered cautiously. "Hello?" "Edward." Veronica's cold, familiar voice echoed through the room. "We need to talk." The silence in the room was suffocating. Agent Garcia made urgent gestures for Edward to keep Veronica on the line while they tried to trace the call. Henry Davis picked up another phone to call the tech team. Rosa leaned against the wall, pale as a ghost. "Veronica," Edward said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Where are you?" "That doesn't matter right now," she replied with that familiar coldness he had once mistaken for elegance. "What matters is that you have something that belongs to me, and I have something you value very much." Edward's stomach clenched. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Edward. I know you found the safe in the basement. I know my dear mother-in-law recorded our conversations, and I know the police are there with you right now." Edward looked at the investigators, perplexed. How could she know all that? "Oh, you're wondering how I know, aren't you?" Veronica laughed bitterly. "You were always so naive. Did you really think I wouldn't have other people helping me? That I wouldn't have eyes and ears in your own house?" The realization hit Edward like a lightning bolt. "Who's working for you?" "Let's just say not everyone who visits your home is as loyal as you think. Some people have very reasonable prices for information." Rosa stepped forward, whispering urgently, "Mr. Edward, last week several strange people came here. Phone technicians, electricians, delivery guys. Any one of them could have installed devices." "Very clever, Rosa," Veronica continued, and Edward realized she was listening to everything, but not clever enough to realize there have been microphones in several rooms of the house for months. Agent Garcia began signaling her team to search for listening devices. Edward felt violated, knowing Veronica had been spying on every conversation, every private moment of his family. "What do you want, Veronica?" "First, I want you to stop treating me like a criminal. Everything I did was for us, for our future. Your mother was becoming a burden, and your company was stagnating. I was just optimizing our situation." "Optimizing?" Edward exploded. "You tortured my mother. You stole millions. You murdered innocent people." "They died," Veronica corrected coldly. "People die, Edward. It's a fact of life. I just accelerated inevitable natural processes." Agent Garcia whispered in Edward's ear. "Keep talking. Every word is evidence." "Was Frank also an inevitable natural process?" Edward asked, remembering her first husband. There was a pause before Veronica answered, and when she did, her voice had lost any pretense of innocence. "Frank was a miscalculation. He found out about some bank transfers and started asking inconvenient questions. Sometimes when people know too much, they need to rest. Edward closed his eyes, listening to the casual confession of murder. How many others, Veronica? How many others needed to arrest? Do you really want to know? Or would you rather focus on what you can do to protect those who are still alive? The threat was clear. Edward felt his blood run cold. If you lay a finger on my mother or Rosa— Oh, but I'm not talking about them, Veronica interrupted with an almost amused tone. Although it is tempting to solve those witness problems, there are much more interesting targets. Who? Your little niece, Amanda. Beautiful child, isn't she? Just 6 years old, goes to Happy Trails preschool, stays in aftercare until 6 p.m. because her parents work late. Edward's world collapsed. Amanda was the daughter of his younger brother who lived in the city, an innocent child who barely knew Veronica. You wouldn't dare. Edward, I need to be very clear with you. I have very dangerous people working for me, people who don't hesitate to solve problems permanently. If you don't cooperate, Amanda could have a terrible accident on her way to school tomorrow. Rosa let out a gasp of horror. Agent Garcia was frantically coordinating protection for the child over her radio. What do you want? Edward asked in a hoarse voice. First, I want you to drop all the charges. Publicly declare that it was all a misunderstanding, that I was a devoted wife caring for your confused mother. That's impossible. There's too much evidence. Evidence can disappear, Edward. Recordings can be deemed forgeries. Witnesses can change their minds or disappear completely. Henry Davis approached Edward, whispering, Don't give in. We have police protection being sent for Amanda right now. But Veronica continued, as if she had heard. Second, I want full access to the accounts that were frozen. 12 million is a ridiculous sum compared to what I should be entitled to as your wife. Ex-wife, Edward corrected coldly. Technically, we're still married, and under community property laws I have rights I intend to exercise. Agent Garcia held up a note for Edward. Trace almost complete. Keep talking. Veronica, even if I wanted to do that, it's impossible. The accounts are under federal investigation. There's no way to access them. There's always a way, Edward, always, and you have exactly 24 hours to find it. And if I can't, then Amanda will have a very sad accident. Your mother might have a relapse in her recovery. Rosa might find that working for you is very dangerous, and you might discover that successful businessmen are attractive targets for kidnappings. The list of threats was delivered with the same coldness one might use to discuss a dinner menu. Edward understood he was dealing with someone completely devoid of humanity. There's a third condition, Veronica added. What is it? I want you to come meet me, alone. No cops, no lawyers, no tracking devices. There are a few things we need to discuss in person. Where? You'll receive instructions in 2 hours. And Edward, if I detect any police presence, the consequences will be immediate and irreversible. The call ended, leaving a deathly silence in the room. Did you get the trace? Edward asked immediately. Partially, Agent Garcia replied. She's using a burner phone, but we managed to triangulate the general area. She's in the city, south side. And my niece. We already have a team en route to the school. The child will be under police protection within the hour. Henry Davis approached with a grave expression. Edward, you cannot consider meeting her. It's obviously a trap. But if I don't go, she might follow through on her threats. If you go, she will almost certainly try to kill you, Agent Garcia said firmly. Veronica eliminating you would solve several of her problems. No primary witness, no access to the family's resources through you, and the entire fortune eventually passing to her through inheritance. Just then Rosa approached hesitantly. Mr. Edward, there's something I didn't tell you before. What is it? Last week, when your mother was in the hospital, I found some strange things in Veronica's room. Papers with information on your entire family, your parents, your siblings, even about Amanda. What kind of information? Addresses, routines, work schedules, schools, like she had been studying everyone important to you for a long time. Agent Garcia grabbed her radio. We need protection for the entire Clark family. Now. Edward sat down heavily, understanding that Veronica had spent years planning not only to rob him, but to completely destroy his family if necessary. "There's one more thing," Rosa continued reluctantly. "I found a vial of medication in her bathroom. I looked it up online. It's poison, the kind that kills slowly, without leaving obvious traces." "She was poisoning my mother," Edward murmured, "and probably planning to poison me too." The phone rang, again making everyone jump. Edward answered with trembling hands. "Edward," it was Veronica again, "I forgot to mention something important." "What?" "If anything happens to me, if I'm arrested, hurt, or worse, several people I've hired have very specific instructions on how to proceed. Think of it as an inverted life insurance policy." "What instructions?" "Let's just say your entire family will be very, very busy dealing with multiple simultaneous accidents. And Edward, these people won't take money to stop. Once the process begins, there's no turning back." The call ended again, but this time Edward knew that Veronica had created a situation where any move could be fatal for innocent people. Agent Garcia looked at him with a grim expression. "Edward, we have to make a very difficult decision, and we have less than 22 hours to do it." From upstairs came the faint voice of Eleanor calling for Edward. Even after everything, she still wasn't safe. No one was safe as long as Veronica remained free, and now she had made it so that arresting her was potentially as dangerous as letting her go. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Edward, Eleanor, and Rosa has touched your heart. If you were moved by Rosa's courage in fighting for her helpless employer and by Eleanor's strength to survive the abuse, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this story. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that true wealth lies in the loyalty of those who love us, in the courage to report what is wrong, and in the strength to start over when all seems lost. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with another narrative that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the values that truly matter in life.